My move to Bank of America 8 years ago was quite unexpected. Bank of America has an incredibly strong commitment to giving back. We really build our company profits on purpose. And we give hundreds of millions of dollars every year in the form of grants to local nonprofits. But importantly, our teammates volunteer 2.7 million hours to nonprofits of many descriptions.
This is Dr. Rob Harter with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy the show, as together we hear how they are making their world better.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast with Rob Harter. I'm Lena LaRue, based currently in Mexico, and I'm a listener just like you who cares about the nonprofit world and the people leading it. If you're looking to learn and grow as a nonprofit leader, you're in the right place. Thanks for listening. Now, here's Rob.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Rob Harter, your host. So I want to start out by giving a shout out to my listeners in South Korea. Not long ago, I gave a shout out to my listeners in Ireland. It's so fun to see and hear of who is listening to the show around the world. Apparently, a lot of listeners are listening in from South Korea. So, hey, welcome. So glad you're a part of listening into the show. If you are listening in from South Korea, first of all, thank you for tuning in, but also let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And specifically, if you've got some ideas for guests or leaders or speaker authors that you think would be great for the show, please email me. The best way you can email me is rob@robharter.com. rob@robharter.com. Just send me a quick email. Let me know who the person is. Maybe you want to be on this show. Let me know. I'm always looking for and open to new ideas of getting great guests on the show that are doing cutting edge work and really committed to the social impact sector. Okay, so for today's conversation, I've got Dianne Bailey. She is the Managing Director and National Philanthropic Strategy Executive for the Bank of America. Now, a lot of people think Bank of America, it's a bank. It's the second largest bank in the U.S. But what do they do philanthropically? Well, they give a lot of money away through their philanthropic arm. She's going to give us some numbers. It's actually quite a bit more than I even realized, and probably more than you realized. But in the conversation, we talk about a lot of different things. And let me just highlight two things for now. First is she's going to talk all about that relational approach we need to take with our donors. You've heard me say this many times on this show. We cannot approach donors in a transactional way. That is the wrong way to do that, right? You always want to connect with donors as real people and connect with them relationally. And she'll talk about specifically how to do that. How to do that really well, how to engage them as volunteers, and how that volunteer experience often overlaps quickly into them becoming donors to your organization. Now, the second thing she'll bring up, I haven't talked about for quite a while. I've had people on the show in the past because of her role at Bank of America. This is something that she's seen every day, and that is this. There is this massive intergenerational wealth transfer going on right now. Money coming from one generation to the next. And what she'll talk about, among other things, is how you as a nonprofit leader can be ready to receive those gifts. How do you make those connections and make sure you're aware of how that process can work, how to build those relationships, and be aware that there is this massive transfer of intergenerational wealth. And there's people out there now that are looking for good places, good causes to give this money. And as she says on the show, she's really excited about these opportunities because there's a lot of people that may not realize they currently have donors that have a larger capacity to give than they would ever realize. So it's a fascinating conversation. Again, so glad you're tuning in. Thanks for being here. And now on to my interview with Dianne. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business. Well, welcome back to the show. I have Dianne Bailey here from Bank of America. Dianne, thanks so much for being on the show today.
It is my pleasure, Rob. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Well, as the people who listen to my show know, that my first question always to my guests is tell us a bit about your story. How did you get to where you are today? Tell us a little bit about your journey, and we're going to get into your work at Bank of America. But yeah, tell us a bit of your story today and how you got there.
I'd be delighted. My story, like I think everyone's story is influenced by amazing humans. Mom and dad, of course, at the beginning of the day. I spent 30 years working in philanthropy, but all of my years have been influenced by people that really care deeply about giving back. My father and my mother both are really extraordinary civic leaders, great donors, great volunteers, and they instilled that in me and my brothers from such an early age. But professionally, it's these wonderful mentors that took me in places that I couldn't have imagined I would go. I left law school rather liftless, not quite sure what the path would be for me, but rather resistant to the traditional path of corporate law. And thankfully, the dean of my law school, an extraordinary woman, Judy Arene, knew me better than I knew myself and helped me cobble together a multifaceted role at the law school. The main job, the W-2 earning job, was raising money in the development office, really telling the story about her leadership, which was a great joy for me, but also teaching a little bit on the adjunct faculty and doing some writing and scholarship. I got married along the way, and Brian got an opportunity in New York, and off we went. But there was no way I was going to replicate that job for our arch rival in admissions, Columbia or NYU. And so happily, another person helps me, an amazing headhunter that saw my mishmash of a resume, but in that discerned the opportunity because I'd worked at a nonprofit, but also had a legal and tax background to work in a practice group at a private law firm where I thought I never wanted to be, but working exclusively with nonprofits, with both grant makers, but also operating charities. As an outside general counsel, tax, regulatory compliance, corporate transactions, lots of board governance work. I moved along the way, following my husband's career again, to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I happily am now, and thankfully was able to join Robinson Bradshaw, one of the preeminent law firms in the Southeast and nationally. And they really gave me the flexibility to nurture my love of this client segment. Now, what I was also doing was giving back to the community, as my parents taught me, as a volunteer, where I met many Bank of America executives. North Carolina, Charlotte is the headquarters, and our senior leaders are committed to giving back. It's in the very DNA of our company. We hold purpose and profit side by side. And so I built these relationships over decades very organically. And so when my current role came open, I think it seemed sort of obvious to everyone. And I'm so grateful it was, because my 8 years at Bank of America have been truly joyful.
Well, always fun to hear a little bit about people's stories, what leads them to where they are today. You do have an interesting background and really interesting training that led you to now working at Bank of America. So let's dive into that. There's lots we want to talk about, but there's the one thing I thought I'd launch into, because I think my listeners will be really interested to hear this. You've done a study on philanthropy from the bank, and it talked about all kinds of different things. A couple of things I want to highlight today is they show in the results that from the research that giving is up compared to pre-pandemic levels before COVID, but fewer households are giving, fewer affluent households are giving. So talk about some of those factors. What is driving the increase in total giving despite a decline in the number of affluent donors? What did you find in your research?
So just a little bit about the study of philanthropy. The Bank of America study of philanthropy, it is the preeminent research into affluent Americans and their motivations and strategies in their giving. Conduct the research in partnership with the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. So it is rigorous academic research. I get to partner with amazing colleagues at Bank of America, Bill Jarvis, who's the managing editor of the study, and also Dr. Anna Pruitt, who recently joined us from the Lilly Family School. She was for 8 years the managing editor of Giving USA, which is the general population research. She's extraordinary in every way. So the research, it tells us a lot about the motivations and strategies over time, right? So we've been doing it for 20 years. The current version is the 10th iteration. And now the participation rate is down to 4 and 5. So 4 and 5, so the vast majority are actively making at least one contribution annually to nonprofit organizations, but 1 in 5 aren't. And that is a really steep decline, 10 percentage points over as many years. Now, I will say we're seeing the same declines in the general population. Now, fewer than 50% overall are giving. And yet, the amount continues to increase in aggregate, with the obvious answer being that we are increasingly relying on a smaller and more affluent circle of donors to achieve our fundraising goals. The affluent donor group gives 10 times more than the general population. On average, $33,000 a year compared to around $3,000 for the general population in our most recent research report. And I think these wealthy donors, they just understand that it is incumbent on them to lean into the causes that they care about and give generously.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We've had several people on the show talk about this. So talk about for you and this research, and then as you look at nonprofit leaders, how should nonprofit social impact leaders interpret the shift to fewer, higher capacity donors? How does that shape their fundraising?
Maybe I should step back a little bit and talk about why we're seeing the decline. We asked in our research, if you're an affluent person, and affluent for us is using the accredited investor standard. So it's 200,000 in income or $1 million in wealth, not including the value of your primary residence. So it really is a mass affluent. It's not an ultra high net worth research report, which is the group that most organizations are really relying on. Yes, an occasional billionaire pops in with a big gift, but by and large, you're really looking to that, that top 7 to 8% of the population in terms of their income and their wealth. And so the number one reason why they say they're not giving, even this group, this affluent group, is that taking care of their families is a higher priority. More than 40% said that in our most recent research. It's just even the wealthy people are feeling the pressures of inflation and, the economic struggles. So that is real. Now, there are other factors that are lingering out there. Changing patterns of religion certainly are a factor. Fewer people being members of synagogues, mosques, temples, and churches. We know benevolence is taught and practiced in those settings. There's a substitution effect, right, where people are using their capital in other ways to achieve their social impact goals, sustainable investing, conscious consumerism, political giving. For most people, this is an augmentation, just an expansion of what they're doing as a complement to their charitable giving. But for some, they're substituting all or some of their giving with these other tools. But it's also trust, right? Trust. So we ask, of the various institutions, whether they be public, private, governmental, and even individuals, like who do you trust to make our world better, to achieve your social impact goals? And nonprofits have the greatest amount of trust, but only 20% have a great deal of trust in nonprofits and a great deal of confidence in nonprofits to achieve those goals. And so, of course, that's going to have a dampening effect on giving. And so you ask, well, what's the nonprofit to do? Right?
Right, exactly.
And the most important thing they will do is build relationships. And this is particularly true for major gift fundraising, really where got to have those deep, deep, deep relationships. So they know that their investments are worthwhile, right? Having the impact reporting so they can really understand how their dollars are being put to use, again, to achieve whatever those impact goals happen to be.
No, that's great. Okay, well, this is good to get some of that background of the why and the how in terms of how you gather this information. And I know a lot of listeners out here that's their full-time job. They're fundraising for their nonprofit organization, or they're the development director of a national organization, or they're an executive director. But either way, they're wearing that hat where they are all about fundraising. Are there some social impact organizations that are really seeing really good gains in how they're changing, perhaps in response to this idea of fewer donors giving maybe larger gifts, so the donor base is getting smaller? Are there people out there doing effective strategies to kind of work around this new reality? Tell us what you're seeing around the country.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say the first thing that I see that is very effective really goes to donor motivation. So I've mentioned the case for support. I've mentioned impact measurement and reporting. However, that's not really where the magic is, right? The magic is in the relationships where you can build the bridge between what motivates the donor and what your organization and your mission needs, right? So we know from our Bank of America study of philanthropy that the top 3 motivations for donors in their giving are 1, their personal values, 2, their interests, 3, their experiences.
Okay.
You got to get to pretty low on the list before you get to a compelling pitch, right? Or case for support. And so really investing in talented frontline fundraisers that are supported by pipeline and prospect researchers And critically, very strong stewardship officers on the back end, right? We know it costs a lot more to get a new donor than to keep and move up the donors that you have. Those people that really have got enough time, and we see these portfolios, hundreds of prospects, these major gift officers' portfolios, where it's not reasonable that you could really build an authentic and true relationship. Because the most important thing you do as a fundraiser is listen, right? It's what my mama told me. You have two ears and one mouth. Use them in those proportions, right? Because fundraising, it's not sales, it's matchmaking. And so, the organizations that are doing it right are resourced and staffed appropriately to really lean into that highly relational, not transactional major gift program. The other thing that I see organizations that are really thriving, and this comes to our research do well, is actually build the acumen of their donors. We ask in our study for the respondents to rate themselves in terms of their expertise or lack thereof. We give them three choices. We say, you can tell us that you're a novice, or that you're knowledgeable, or that you're an expert. Okay, only 4% say they're experts in philanthropy. 4%. And everybody else evenly divided between novice and experts. And here's the thing. I know that it's not feigned humility, right? That people really lack confidence in their knowledge around being a philanthropist, being a donor, being a volunteer, being a civic leader. One of the reasons I know it is by how they're giving. So 94% are giving cash checks and credit cards, right? From those resources. 94%. In our most recent research report, only 4% were giving appreciated securities. Okay, this was 2024 data when the markets were humming. And so people very likely had appreciation built up in their public securities portfolio. So there could be very real tax efficiencies to maximize the amount and the impact of their gifts. And yet, very few are even giving of publicly traded securities. Forget about gifts of complex or illiquid assets. And so really it's incumbent upon high-performing fundraisers to build the acumen and the expertise of these donors. And just the way they give is a very low-hanging fruit. Their investments are rewarded because, again, we know from the research and also our experience, those that say they're experts give 6 times more than novices. And so, just leaning into that because we are the experts. We work in philanthropy 24/7. It's what we do. Most of us, both personally and professionally. I mean, I know from my team, there's nobody that wandered in to work at the foundation endowment investment management team at Bank of America, right? You had to be very intentional. And it's because all of us really care about doing good and really care about positive social impact.
Well, you said several things in there very interesting. First, I really like that point of listening, that the job of a fundraiser or development person is to listen first. That is so critical. I couldn't agree with you more. Why do you think it's so hard for people to understand that and not get into that sales mode that I think sometimes development people fall into?
I think actually the board members are the ones that need to hear this message. I mean, if you've been in fundraising long enough, when I first started in fundraising, I wanted to be a good performer. It's sort of like you would in academics or in sports, like you want to do your part. And you think if you commit the strategic plan to memory, if you have data and stories to back it up, that you can come in and, that you'll be able to close on the big gift. But it doesn't take long where conversations just shut down because you've pitched the wrong idea because you don't know what it is that they really care about. Another old adage, ask a woman for money and she'll give you advice. Ask a woman for advice and she'll give you money. It's matchmaking. It's the building of the relationships. But the board members are the ones that I think are most at risk of not understanding this. And so we spend a lot of time with our clients, with their boards, really leaning into understanding the data. So our research tells you who's giving, who's not giving, where they're giving, why they're giving. And I've already mentioned how they're giving, right? And so we give them the data. And then we spend time helping them really curate their personal passion statement, like their why, because you do have to kick off the conversation. But then we very specifically train them to ask probing questions, right? What is it that you care about? Where are you giving your time? Where are you giving your money? Do you have experiences that help you identify with the mission of the organization that I care about? Really to turn the monologue into a true dialogue. And again, we do that very intentionally. And then, of course, do the relationship mapping so they can, see where their business associates, their friends, their family, the people that they worship with, the people that they hang out in civic clubs with, where there might be that connection. And then, of course, providing that call to action. Where are the points of entry? Is it an event? Is it a tour? Is it a volunteer experience that will, provide that opportunity to build the relationship before you ask for the gift? Because when you do that, the multiplier effect on the gift is huge. One thing about volunteering. So, like building expertise, engaging people as volunteers is another amplifier for giving. Volunteers give 2.5 times more than non-volunteers overall.
We'll be right back. Are you looking for an easy and effective way to boost your nonprofit's donations? Well, look no further than DonorBox, the online fundraising platform that streamlines your fundraising efforts, maximizes donations, and simplifies giving for your supporters. With DonorBox, you can create beautiful donation forms, accept digital wallet payments, track donations, and send auto receipts. And the best part? There are no setup or monthly fees and no long-term contracts required. So what are you waiting for? Visit donorbox.org today to get started. That is www.donorbox.org. No, that's so good. And let's go into that. I want to talk about the overlap of volunteers and donors because I think you're absolutely right. I've seen that firsthand. It's a really critical piece. Talk about why is that? What have you found in terms of motivations? What role does volunteering play when it comes to cultivating long-term donor relationships, especially among those who are maybe high net worth donors to an organization? What would you say again to nonprofit leaders about that?
So bringing them in as volunteers is absolutely key. One of the reasons why is volunteering can be a great way for donor acquisition. And let me tell you why I say that. Because remember, donors give because of their values, their interests, and their experiences. They volunteer and respond to your need. They show up as volunteers because they think that they can advance your cause. They can respond to a need. So you bring them in as a volunteer, and then bingo, what have you done? You created an experience and hopefully an interest and also visibility in how their values can be expressed through the mission of your organization. So it's huge. Other research that I've seen that's so interesting about volunteering is from the Women's Philanthropy Institute. So I hope you know Women's Philanthropy Institute. It's the think tank within the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy that looks at gender and the differences that inspire generosity and by women and men, but in different ways. So we have a Women Give series. I say we, I'm part of the council. It's an amazing organization. And it's going a little bit back, but 2017, our report was on life satisfaction and gender differences in philanthropy. One of the key findings is that women have their greatest joy when they give more. And why do they give more? They often give more because they've got that personal relationship with the nonprofit. Go back to what we talked about at the beginning, trust, right? When you are on the front lines in the nonprofit, you don't have somebody intermediating or interpreting what's happening with the organization. You feel it, you know it with your own head and heart. You're much more likely to want to increase your giving to the organization.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I think it's not original with me, but the idea is the percentage of giving is directly correlated with the percentage of trust, which you've already talked about. And that relationship is where that trust is built and furthered and deepened. Is there anything else you find that nonprofits really align themselves with this motivation that goes beyond just, like you said, a transactional approach? That's certainly not the approach to take, but building those relationships, finding opportunities for people to give back and to volunteer. What else have organizations, I should say, that have done really well to align around these motivations that you're seeing that really cause people to give?
They've got to ask not only for the lifetime gift, but also the legacy gift. I mean, where we see organizations getting it out of the park. I mean, I just got an email yesterday from a client that just got a $12 million gift from an estate. And, these are not inconsequential gifts. And this is one of many. I mean, this is an organization that's been doing planned giving intentionally for decades. Somebody else planted the seed that is the tree that they're now sitting under. No question about it. But look, I hope we're going to talk about the great wealth transfer. I mean, there's hardly anything more important in the world of nonprofits than this topic. 124 trillion coming down the pike, 18 trillion already earmarked for charitable purposes. I mean, and that's against a funding base of like 8 trillion today. I mean, it's mind blowing. Any for-profit professional that's listening to this, any board member, any donor needs to be thinking strategically around how you can give during your lifetime, but also with your legacy. What I tell our clients is to not overcomplicate it. Look, I'm a recovering lawyer. I could get lost in the gobbledygook of split interest trusts all day long. Do not let it slow you down. Do not let it bog you down. If you want to wait until you are proficient in the difference between a NIMCRET and a FlipCRET, you likely are going to be waiting a really long time. And this money is moving. So stop madness. Stop the madness. Focus on two things.
Yeah.
Requests and retirement accounts. That's it. If you focus on bequests and retirement accounts, you are ahead of the game. And, bequests, that requires a lawyer, but people are regularly reviewing their estate plans. And so there are opportunities. We've got clients that just slap that list of beneficiaries as an appendix that only requires a notary, not a full plan. So definitely be asking for bequests, whether it's a percentage or a set dollar amount. Now, remember, we've already talked about stewardship, but you've got to steward these legacy donors like their annual donors, because again, it can be changed. And, I heard some really interesting data not too long ago about most realized plan gifts were either created or affirmed within 5 years of the donor's passing. So, really staying current with those legacy donors through the request is key. But retirement assets are lifetime and legacy gifts, right? These qualified charitable distributions for donors that are 70 and a half, willing to bet that many people listening to this podcast are lamenting the fact that they have an aging donor base, right? That is just the reality. And you can control for that by also asking for these qualified charitable distributions for the 70 and a half crowd. It's indexed for inflation. It's up well over $100,000 a year. If they can give it a very tax efficient way directly to nonprofits, make sure they understand that they can't take the check and then send it to you. That is undoing the efficiency of the qualified charitable distribution. It's got to go straight to the nonprofit, but that's a huge opportunity. But the contingent beneficiaries, not even contingent, the charitable beneficiaries for the retirement accounts, that's a great legacy tool at any age. And in fact, particularly for your younger donors, right? If you're looking for your board to have unanimous participation in your legacy giving, for a younger donor that may not be married, may not have children, creating a partial or full beneficiary for the charitable organizations, the retirement account, can be a great plan to get assets. So lots to do there. Don't overcomplicate it, but post haste right now. Prioritize in plan giving program.
I understand the urgency. Absolutely. Well, and you already gave us a good segue into this conversation that I have had many people on the show speak about this massive transfer of assets from one generation to another. And those dollars are available to be given to organizations. And, when I've talked about this in the past, what's interesting is a lot of people are like, well, nonprofit leaders, that is, well, where are those people? I don't have them in my donor base right now. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, but also unpack that for my listeners, because there is, from all of data points, there's this intergenerational wealth transfer that will reshape the giving to various organizations, but it also reshapes the donor experience. So maybe again, talk about that. How best can social impact organizations and nonprofit leaders be prepared for that and ready when that opportunity comes?
It is so exciting, Rob. I'm so glad that we're talking about this. And I would say the best thing to do is to prioritize two donor segments: women and rising generation, right? Okay. So it's very easy to move quickly to, the millennials and the Gen Z, and when you're thinking about how to prepare for this great wealth transfer. But I want to remind you that a woman who has a husband is on average 2 years younger, and it will on average live 5 to 7 years longer. Okay. So there is nearly a decade in which that woman likely will have either control or at least substantial influence over the final disposition of those assets. And we know from the Bank of America study Philanthropy that women are more likely to give, 8 points more likely to give, substantially more likely to give. And I've already told you they're most joyful when they give more. So really looking to women's affinity groups within your nonprofit, bring them together, give them opportunities to socialize, inspire them to give and to give more is huge. Now, don't neglect the rising generation. The right time to make a friend is before you need one. And they have told us time and time again that they don't have this dutiful giving back instinct, right? They don't feel a sense of obligation. They're not doing it from this noblesse oblige. I mean, they are giving because they're striving for impact, and also they're giving in community. I mean, they're much more likely to respond to social circles, again, because of this erosion of trust. They trust their friends who are working with nonprofits. And so there's a lot of that cross-pollination that happens, some of it fueled by social media, some of it, more, directly unintermediated by technology, peer-to-peer. But what we know about the rising generation is that today, they're not giving as much. We know that, right? We know that. The data is clear that in terms of their cash contributions, right? For the affluent, it's 71% versus 85%. They're not giving as much, right? However, they are equally likely to volunteer. 43%, 40%, equally likely to volunteer. And what is their most scarce resource? Their time. And the fact that they're already, when they're building careers, often raising families, these punishing commutes, they're still giving their time, which is a huge indicator. The other indicator is they're roughly half as likely to say that they don't give because they don't want to. All right. 35% of the older people who aren't giving say, yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to. I call it the toddler response. I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to? I understand taking care of your priorities, taking care of your family is a higher priority, but stamp your foot, I don't want to. I don't even know what that means. On the graph in our chart, it's in a red bar. It's so angry. But, younger people are half as likely to see that. And so think about the younger people. Student loan debt, saving for a house, paying down a mortgage. I mean, just childcare alone is so expensive. So it's not surprising to me that they would feel cash strapped in the moment. And so they're giving what they have, even though it's a scarce resource, their time. But when they increase their affluence by what they earn and what they inherit, look out. Look out. This generation, I think it's going to be a new Gilded Age in philanthropy. I think they're going to do wonderful things with unbelievable, breathtaking generosity. And I can't wait. I mean, anything I can do to help, call me, please. I'm here for you.
Okay. So you're really hopeful about this transfer of wealth and believe that, again, nonprofits should be preparing now, building those relationships, being clear. Is there anything else in terms of how nonprofits in general are doing philanthropy, are receiving these gifts, are engaging people? Is there other things that they should do to prepare and maybe even shift a little bit of their focus, or you feel like what you've already shared is enough for now?
I think that you really need to focus on relational giving, planned giving strategies, and really looking at this key donor segments, women and rising gen. I think that's a lot of homework, Rob.
That's a lot right there. There is, no doubt. Well, and they'll dive into the study that we're going to put it in the show notes. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit, speaking of which, because you deal with a lot of, I would say, more higher net worth individuals that give. That's part of just the nature of the work that you do. So donor advised funds, you talked about this where people still are giving a lot of checks and cash, but I know that one of the fastest growing ways people are giving to nonprofits and charity is through donor advised funds, or DAFs. Talk about that. What is the process that you feel like most nonprofits need to do, or maybe what are the mistakes they're doing of not being prepared to receive those gifts? Because on average, encourage, as you know, donor advised funds, when people use that to give their much higher gifts than just your normal check or cash gifts. So talk about that, how people can best maximize and be ready for those DAFs to be given to their organization.
So I'm so glad you raised the question around donor advised funds. I mean, donors, I always say they're the future of philanthropy. The future
It
is
seems
now.
that way, yeah.
The future is now. My dear friend, Tom Lawson, who's recently retired from Bank of America, talks about donor advised funds as the Swiss Army knife of philanthropy. And I hear other people say that they're the first responders in philanthropy. And all of that is true. So we are seeing with our clients, again, according to our research, of the higher net worth, so the 5 million plus segment, half of those people either have a giving vehicle or are planning to establish a giving vehicle within the next 3 years. And that includes donor advised funds as a very, very, very popular, flexible source of support. And so I always get this question like, how do I access donor advised funds? I'm like, the same way you access your donors, because most donor advised funds today are not large, staffed, philanthropic empires, right? Most donor advised funds today are held by your donors, right? And it's just another pocket that they access for their giving. And so what you should not do is think you can rely on a donor advised fund sponsor to introduce you to those fund holders, right? I mean, there are bits of that, but for the most part, the donor advised fund sponsor, unless they have, like we do at Bank of America, a team of philanthropic advisors, right, that are really working directly with clients to help them be more strategic and impactful in their giving, including selecting nonprofits and doing due diligence and the impact reporting that they may support. In general, a donor advised fund sponsor is really an administrator of these charitable giving accounts, where they're really focused on the technology and the ease. And so when you're helping your donors think through giving using a donor advised fund, like the most important thing, two things you can do is one, make it easy for them, because mostly they'll search either by your real name. So if you've got some DBA that's not in the IRS records, because that's what they're going to link back to is the IRS records to make sure that you are a public charity in good standing, right? So make sure that your real name is known. Bonus points if you can make your EIN accessible on your website so they can grab that. Because that's how they're going to search for you in their phone, right? And that's how they're going to do it. They're going to take their phone out of their pocket and they're going to look for you. So make that obvious and easy. By all means, steward your donor advised fund donors appropriately. Please do not send a thank you note to the sponsor, right? Send a thank you note to the donor that made the gift. And, usually, even if they haven't identified themselves specifically, like you can interpret who they are by the name of the gift fund. Now, sometimes it's completely anonymous, but not usually. I mean, yeah. I mean, some donors do use donor advised funds because they want to be under the radar. Because, by the way, we badger them. The number one reason why people stop giving is because you've gotten too many appeals, too closely timed, and it's off with your head, right? So there are some donors that just don't want that. But for the most part, you can interpret it. And by all means, give the actual donor, the person who recommended the distribution, the appropriate soft credit in your account, right? And also solicit them differently. In our experience, many of the donor advised fund holders, like at year end, are really just focusing on how much they're going to contribute to their donor advised fund. And they're not so much focused on chasing the organization's year-end deadlines. So in Q1, if you haven't heard from your donor advised fund holder, by all means, reach out to them, check in, let them know what you're up to, and ask. I mean, part of this is for heaven's sake, ask for the gift. Don't think they're thinking about you.
You're like, be bold.
And if they last in their giving, don't assume they're upset with you. And by all means, if they are, you want to know why. I mean, you can maybe bring them back, or maybe it's something you need to know with other donors, but continue to reach out. But DAFs are awesome. And when they get maligned in the media, it's infuriating to me, quite frankly, because the distribution rates from DAFs are over 20%. Foundations really hover to that mandatory minimum. It becomes ceiling, not a floor. And that's not what we see with donor advised fund holders. They're incredibly generous. Again, those first responders in philanthropy.
Yeah, right. Now, that's a good description for them. And everything I've read about them, I've had multiple people on the show about talking about them. They are really an effective way that people are using to give to nonprofits. So certainly listeners, make sure you're able to, and you're letting people know, letting your donors know that you receive DAFs. And it's a very easy process to set that up. Well, it's been a really interesting conversation because you have a unique perspective, I think, because of your Bank of America and just what you do and some of the other work that you're doing. You've given us a lot of information, as you mentioned, a lot of homework already, but is there anything else when it comes to trend lines that you're seeing you want to make sure my listeners hear from you today as we wrap up?
Yeah. And I think part of that is related to what I actually do at the bank. And so I think that would be helpful context. So because of my title, National Philanthropic Strategy Executive, I think many people think I lead the Bank of America Charitable Foundation. And that is not true. I work very closely with that team. They're amazing. I mean, I've already mentioned the millions of dollars we're deploying for good in our communities. But I am part of the foundation and endowment investment management team. And notwithstanding the fact that we're number one in outsourced chief investment office assets globally for both grant makers and also operating charities, a lot of people don't know we're in this business. And it blows my mind. And, part of the reason why we're so successful, I mean, one is the strength of our investment platform. Chris Heisey is our CIO. Look, we've got access to data from consumers. We bank 1 in 2 households in the country. So we see all these trend lines really early. So, we've got a really strong, robust investment platform. That is our business. But we also have great capabilities in managing client accounts with our administration and our grant making. And my team, the philanthropic advising team. We've got incredible strategists all over the country that have on average 25 years of experience working with nonprofits and also donors. So we do sit at the intersection of the donors and the doers, which is a great place to both make matches and also mediate disagreements. I mean, we're here to really evangelize around the trust-based philanthropy because we see it. Like we see how it can really enhance the donor experience and also really maximize the impact for the nonprofits that they support. But because of my vantage point, sitting on this $100 billion outsourced chief investment office platform, really serving these high performing donors and nonprofits across the country, I see the power of endowment, right? I mean, in this period of disruption, right, where the federal and other governmental funding streams, where there's been a little bit of like donor malaise and chill. I mean, people not stopping giving, but maybe pausing their giving. There are a lot of competing demands to really assess where they can have the maximum impact. Those organizations that had an additional funding stream for sustainability that came from endowment have really been able to thrive through this disruption. And so it goes back to planned giving. One of the best ways. Think about this client that just got this $12 million planned gift. I mean, they could put that right into their endowment and continue to build that endowment over time for their long-term intergenerational organizational sustainability. And that's really been the difference maker in this time of disruption between nonprofits that close. I mean, we've seen plenty of nonprofits either dissolve or merge into other nonprofits. And, those that have got those endowment assets, they're calling their own shots and really able to, move through this period of disruption with strength.
Well, it's a helpful description to say you're really at the intersection between the doers and the donors. I think that's an interesting way to describe your role. Well, for my listeners, again, I'm going to put a bunch of things in our show notes so they can learn about the study that you put out, a little bit more about Bank of America. But if they want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you're doing, where would you send them and how can they connect with you?
The very best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. For better or for worse, if you go to my Instagram, you're just going to see puppy pictures. Well, I do. We're very cute dog and darling children and husband and all those things too. That's what you're going to see. Go see my vacations. But on LinkedIn, I use this data to help tell the story. I promise not to spam you. And also, there is an option to follow me, but don't do that. Let's connect because I really want to learn from your listeners also to make sure that I'm staying current through their great work.
Well, again, Dianne, thanks so much for sharing so much information. It's a fascinating world we're living in when it comes to the fundraising world, particularly with this intergenerational wealth transfer. I think we could spend more time on that, but there's so much there. But again, you've given us some great insights and tools. So thanks for taking time to be on the show today.
Honored by the opportunity. Thanks so much.
Hey, friends. Well, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to other podcasts. I also want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. This will actually help us get this great content out to more nonprofit leaders just like you. You can also join the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast community. Find other resources and interviews of past guests all on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Well, thanks again for listening. And until next time, keep making your world better. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business.